I still remember that day like it was yesterday. The sun was merciless, hanging over the school like a blazing torch, burning every inch of the ground. The air smelled of dust and sweat, the kind of afternoon where even breathing felt heavy. The courtyard was full of laughter, but not the good kind. It wasn't joyful or innocent. It was sharp, cruel, and it was all aimed at me. I was 15, standing near the canteen with my torn school bag hanging from one shoulder, counting the few coins I had left. I remember those coins clearly, dull, scratched, not enough even for a small packet of chips. My shoes were worn out, patched so many times that the sole was starting to separate. I thought if I kept my head down, maybe no one would notice, but luck never really worked in my favor back then. That's when I heard his voice, loud, confident, the kind of voice that made people turn around instantly. Rayan Malik, the name everyone knew, the boy everyone wanted to be friends with. His father was a businessman, rich enough to have his name printed on the school's donation board. Rayan always arrived in a fancy car, wearing a branded backpack and shoes that probably cost more than my father's monthly salary. He looked at me, then at the coins in my hand, and that smirk appeared, the kind that told you he was about to say something you'd remember for the rest of your life. "Hey, look everyone!" he shouted. "The charity kid is here. Maybe we should all donate him a pencil." The words echoed through the courtyard, cutting through the noise like a blade. For a moment I froze. My body didn't move, but my heart raced. Then came the laughter. It started with a few voices, then grew louder, spreading through the crowd like wildfire. Everyone was laughing. Some because they found it funny, others because they didn't want to be next in line to be mocked. It didn't matter why. The pain felt the same. My face burned. My throat tightened. I wanted to disappear, to melt into the ground. I kept my eyes down, staring at my shoes, pretending not to care. But inside, something broke. Or maybe something woke up. I wasn't angry at the joke itself. I was angry because he was right. I was poor. My father worked from sunrise to sunset in a mechanic shop that smelled of oil and rust. My mother cleaned houses, scrubbing floors and washing dishes just so I could wear a uniform to that school. Every rupee I spent was a result of their hard work, their sacrifice, and yet, standing there, surrounded by laughter, I felt smaller than ever. I could see Rayan and his friends slapping each other on the back, laughing like they had just won something. Maybe they had. They had won that moment. They had power and I had nothing. But what they didn't realize was that power doesn't last forever. When they finally walked away, I stood there in silence. The courtyard emptied slowly, the laughter fading, but the echo stayed in my head. I clenched my fists so hard that my nails dug into my palms. My heart was pounding, my eyes burning with tears I refused to let fall. I told myself crying wouldn't change anything. I told myself that one day, things would be different. I looked toward the school gate where Rayan's car was parked, shiny and spotless. I whispered quietly, so only I could hear it. "One day, Rayan, one day you'll remember this face." It wasn't said out of rage. It was said out of certainty. I didn't know how or when, but something inside me made a promise that day. I wouldn't always be the boy they laughed at. From that day forward, I carried that moment like a scar. Every time I saw Rayan's friends walking by, laughing and joking, I heard that same cruel laughter again. Every time I felt ashamed of what I didn't have, I reminded myself that I was more than my clothes or the money in my pocket. I had something they didn't: hunger, a burning need to rise. After school, while others went to their expensive tuitions or hung out in cafes, I went straight to my father's workshop. The air was thick with smoke and grease, and the noise of clanking metal filled the room. My father would hand me a wrench and smile tiredly, saying, "Work hard, son. The world may laugh now, but one day it will see." I didn't fully believe him back then, but those words became fuel. At night, when my mother thought I was asleep, I'd sit by the window staring at the stars. I'd think about how far away they were, yet still shining so bright. I told myself, if light could travel that far in the dark, maybe I could too. Maybe one day I'd be someone who wasn't defined by poverty or pity. Maybe I'd be the one standing tall while they watched from below. That single day of humiliation became the turning point of my life. It lit a fire that never went out. It taught me that sometimes pain is the best teacher. It doesn't just hurt you, it shapes you. Every insult, every laugh, every whisper behind my back became part of my motivation. I didn't need to fight back with words or anger. I'd fight back with success. Years later, I realized that moment didn't just make me stronger. It defined me. It gave me a reason to wake up, to work harder, to dream bigger. I stopped wishing for an easy life and started building the kind of life where I'd never be mocked again. That day, under that burning sun, surrounded by laughter, I made a silent promise. Not just to Rayan, but to myself. I would rise, I would build, and when the time came, I wouldn't need to say a word. My success would speak loud enough for both of us. That was the day I stopped being the poor boy. That was the day I started becoming something more. Life didn't get easier after that day. It got harder, heavier, more punishing in ways I never imagined. While others were celebrating the end of exams, laughing in restaurants, and taking pictures for social media, I was in my father's mechanic shop, hands deep in black grease, tightening bolts, wiping oil off my arms, and counting the hours until midnight. My clothes smelled of smoke and fuel, my back ached, but I didn't complain. Complaining didn't pay bills. Complaining didn't change anything. I told myself this was temporary, that the same hands covered in grease today would one day sign business deals, shake important hands, and build something that mattered. But for now, those hands had to earn every coin the hard way. That small jar under my bed became my secret treasure. Every coin I dropped inside made a soft metallic sound that felt louder than the world's laughter. It reminded me that I was moving forward, even if it was inch by inch. That jar wasn't just filled with coins, it was filled with belief, with a silent promise to myself that I'd never stop fighting. Some nights I'd pull it out, hold it close and whisper, "You're my ticket out of this." After work, when the streets were quiet and the world was asleep, I'd lie on my bed, scrolling through my cracked phone screen. The glass was chipped, the battery barely lasted, but it was my window to another world. A world where people like me had beaten the odds. I read stories about people who started from nothing and built empires. I didn't envy them. I studied them. I paid attention to their struggles, their mistakes, their breakthroughs. I wanted to understand what made them different. And every night before closing my eyes, I'd repeat the same line, "If they can do it, so can I." But life doesn't hand out rewards for motivation. It tests you to see how badly you want something. I found that out when I graduated. I had the grades, I had the drive, but I didn't have the money. College was out of reach. I applied for scholarships, begged for financial aid, even met with local sponsors, but every conversation ended the same way: polite smiles and quiet rejection. It felt like the world had already decided where I belonged, and higher education wasn't it. My father's health started to decline around that time. Years of breathing in fumes and bending over engines had taken a toll on him. The man who once stood tall with strength now coughed through the nights, struggling to stand for long hours. Watching him work despite the pain broke something inside me. I wanted to take care of him, but how could I when I was barely holding myself together? The small income we had was barely enough for rent, groceries, and his medicine. Some days, it came down to choosing between food or medicine. I remember lying awake at night, stomach empty, the sound of my father's coughing echoing through the room, my mother whispering prayers in the dark. I'd stare at the ceiling, feeling a weight on my chest that words couldn't describe. Sometimes I'd question everything. Why us? Why me? But there were no answers, just silence. And in that silence, that old echo returned. The sound of laughter from the schoolyard, Rayan's voice mocking me. It wasn't just a memory anymore. It was fuel. It reminded me of who I was, where I came from, and why I couldn't give up. I got up the next morning before dawn, washed my face in cold water, and went straight to the workshop. My father tried to stop me, saying I needed rest, but I shook my head. Rest was a luxury I couldn't afford. I worked twice as hard, took on extra shifts, and learned every detail of the trade. Not because I loved it, but because I knew every skill could become a weapon in my future. When others left at closing time, I stayed. When they took breaks, I took notes. I wasn't just fixing cars. I was studying how business worked, how clients were handled, how prices were negotiated, how profit was made. People at the shop laughed at me. They said I was wasting my energy, that I should just accept the life I was born into. They said, "You're just a mechanic's son. You'll always be one." But I didn't answer. I just smiled, wiped my hands clean, and got back to work. Because I knew something they didn't. I was writing my own story, and their opinions weren't part of it. There were days when the exhaustion hit me so hard I could barely walk home. My legs would shake, my eyes burned, and sometimes I'd fall asleep still wearing my work clothes. But every night, before sleep took over, I'd remind myself why I was doing this. Not for revenge anymore, not even for pride, but for freedom. Freedom from fear, from pity, from limits. When my savings started to grow, I didn't waste it. I used a part of it to buy second-hand books about business and management. The rest I saved. My mother used to ask why I never treated myself, and I'd just smile. How could I tell her that luxury meant nothing to me until I could give her the life she deserved? There was one night I'll never forget. The power went out. The house was dark, and I sat near the window with a candle beside me, reading a book about entrepreneurs who had failed dozens of times before making it. I remember whispering, "One day, I'll have a story like this." And deep down, I knew I wasn't lying to myself. The world around me didn't care about my pain, and maybe that was for the best. If it had cared, maybe I would have gotten comfortable with sympathy. But being ignored taught me self-reliance. Being overlooked taught me patience. Being poor taught me value. I learned to turn silence into strength and hunger into ambition. By the time I turned 20, I wasn't that humiliated kid anymore. The pain had changed shape. It was no longer a wound. It was a drive, and every time I remembered that laughter, I didn't feel anger. I felt focus, because I knew the day would come when the same world that once laughed at me would stand still and listen. And when that day came, I wouldn't need to shout or brag. My success would do the talking. Success would be my revenge. And nothing, not poverty, not pain, not doubt, was going to stop me from earning it. The day I decided to take control of my life wasn't dramatic. There were no grand speeches or sudden miracles. It started quietly, with me sitting on the edge of my bed one night, staring at my calloused hands, realizing that no one was coming to save me. I had spent years watching others move ahead while I remained stuck in the same place, doing the same work, earning the same pay. I knew I had to do something, anything to change that. So I began with what I had, my determination and the lessons life had already beaten into me. Finding a job had been an endless cycle of disappointment. I applied everywhere, factories, offices, workshops, but doors kept slamming shut. Each rejection email made me question my worth a little more. Still, I refused to let hopelessness settle in. I told myself, "You've been through worse." That thought became my anchor. Then, one morning, I got a call from a small auto parts company. They needed a helper. It wasn't much, but to me, it felt like a step forward, a small crack in the wall I had been banging my head against. The first few weeks were brutal. My hands blistered, my back ached, and by the time I got home, I was too tired to even eat. But I kept showing up every single day. When the others left at 6, I stayed behind to clean the workspace, sort out parts, or check deliveries. I didn't do it to impress anyone. I did it because I wanted to prove to myself that I could outlast the pain. The work was exhausting, but the more I pushed through, the more I started to respect myself. I noticed how people around me complained about everything: the management, the salary, the hours. They'd waste time arguing while I quietly kept working. I realized something powerful. Everyone wants success, but very few are willing to do what it takes. During lunch breaks, while my coworkers laughed and gossiped, I pulled out my phone and watched free online courses about marketing and business management. My cracked screen became my classroom. I didn't understand everything at first, but I kept learning. Every new word, every new concept made me feel a little more confident. I wasn't just a helper anymore. I was becoming a student of success. Months turned into years. Slowly, people started noticing. My supervisors began trusting me with small responsibilities, keeping track of inventory, handling customers, managing minor sales tasks. I didn't say no to anything. Every opportunity, no matter how small, was a stepping stone. I made mistakes, of course, but I learned from them quickly. I started thinking differently, not like an employee, but like someone who wanted to understand how the business really worked. I observed how products were priced, how customers negotiated, how competition affected sales. I paid attention to the little details others ignored. Then one day, my manager called me into his office. He told me I was being promoted to sales assistant. I didn't know how to react. For a moment, I just stood there smiling like a fool. It wasn't just about the title or the raise. It was about validation. Someone finally saw what I had been silently fighting for. That moment reminded me why I had kept going all those years. The promotion came with new challenges. I had to deal with customers, manage paperwork, and meet targets. It was overwhelming, but I loved it. I pushed myself to learn faster, to adapt. I started reading about sales psychology, how people think, how they make decisions. Soon, my performance improved. Sales numbers went up. The company started noticing me again. Within a year, I was promoted to regional coordinator. That role changed everything. I traveled to different branches, met different people, and learned how operations ran at scale. It was like being given a behind-the-scenes look at how a business actually functioned. I saw what worked and what didn't. I also saw how poor leadership could destroy morale and efficiency. I took mental notes of everything, what to do, what not to do, and how to treat people. Every experience became a lesson, every setback a test. Eventually, I climbed up to the position of manager. It felt surreal. The boy who once cleaned oil stains from the floor was now managing teams and making real decisions. I should have been proud, but inside, I knew this wasn't the end. It was just a milestone. The job gave me stability, but not freedom. I wanted something bigger, something I could call my own. The idea of building my own company started growing in my mind, slowly at first, then all at once. I began saving money aggressively. Every bonus, every extra rupee went straight into a separate envelope I hid in my drawer. I cut back on everything. No new clothes, no unnecessary outings, no distractions. My co-workers thought I was crazy. They laughed when I refused to join them for weekend dinners or parties. But I didn't care. I knew what they didn't. That sacrifice now would mean freedom later. At night, I would sit with a notebook, sketching ideas. I didn't know exactly what my business would be, but I knew it had to be something meaningful, something that reflected all the pain and lessons I had gathered along the way. I studied competitors, watched entrepreneurs tell their stories, and imagined the day I'd tell mine. Through it all, one thing became clear. Pain, when used wisely, is the most powerful fuel. Every humiliation, every rejection, every sleepless night had shaped me into someone who didn't quit. My past wasn't a curse, it was my greatest teacher. I often think back to that boy who stood in the schoolyard, humiliated and helpless. If I could speak to him now, I'd tell him, don't worry. One day your pain will turn into power, and when it does, the world will have no choice but to notice. Because the truth is, every success story starts with struggle, and mine had just begun. Starting my own business was the scariest decision I ever made. It wasn't a move of confidence. It was desperation mixed with faith. I had reached a point in life where working for others no longer fulfilled me. I had learned enough, struggled enough, and waited long enough. I wanted something that was truly mine, something I could build from scratch and call my own. So I sold my old bike, the only valuable thing I owned, and borrowed some money from a friend who trusted me when no one else did. With that small sum, I rented a tiny broken-down shop and began my journey. It was nothing fancy, just cracked walls, a rickety counter, and shelves that echoed with emptiness. But to me, that space wasn't a shop. It was my first step toward freedom. The first few months were nothing short of a nightmare. Every morning I opened the shutter with hope, and every night I closed it in disappointment. There were no customers, no calls, and no signs of progress. The silence of that small room began to haunt me. I remember sitting alone at the counter, staring at my dusty inventory, asking myself if I'd made a mistake. Bills started piling up. Rent deadlines loomed over me, and my borrowed money was almost gone. I ate simple meals, sometimes just tea and bread, because every rupee had to stretch. But I refused to quit. I told myself that I had faced humiliation, rejection, and hunger before. This was nothing compared to that. If I could survive those years, I could survive this too. So instead of waiting for customers to come, I went out to find them. I printed a bunch of cheap flyers and hit the streets. From early morning till late evening, I walked from one garage to another, introducing myself and my small business to every mechanic and shop owner I could find. Most of them weren't interested. Some laughed at me. A few told me to come back when I was big enough to matter. Their words hurt, but they didn't stop me. I knew that if I kept showing up, someone would eventually give me a chance. And after weeks of knocking on doors, someone finally did. It was a small garage on the edge of town. The owner, an older man, agreed to try out my products. Just a few pieces to see if my parts were as good as I claimed. I treated that order like it was the biggest deal in the world. I made sure everything was packed perfectly, labeled clearly, and delivered before the promised time. The next week, he called again. Then another customer called, and another. Slowly, people started to notice that I wasn't just another supplier. I was reliable. I didn't overpromise, I didn't cheat, and I always showed up. That was my secret weapon. Consistency. As word spread, orders began to trickle in. My once empty shop started to feel alive. I hired one helper then too. I didn't have fancy uniforms or a modern office, but I made sure we ran things professionally. Every customer mattered. I personally visited garages, shook hands, listened to their needs, and treated them with respect. I learned early on that people don't just buy products, they buy trust. And once I earned that trust, everything changed. After a year, I had enough regular clients to move to a slightly bigger space. I rented a small office, one that had a front desk, a few chairs, and a computer that barely worked. Still, it felt like I had built an empire. Seeing my name printed on the board outside filled me with pride I can't describe. It wasn't about ego. It was about knowing that all those sleepless nights, all those tears and rejections, had finally led somewhere. I was no longer the poor kid people laughed at. I was a business owner, but success didn't come without its own battles. There were delays in shipments, dishonest suppliers, and months when I barely broke even. I made mistakes, bad deals, poor timing, overpromising. But every time I fell, I learned something new. I refused to let failure define me. Instead, I let it teach me. I started keeping notes about what went wrong and how to fix it next time. Slowly, my operation became smoother. I learned how to negotiate, how to market, how to handle clients, and how to manage cash flow. 3 years later, I was signing my first big contract with a regional distributor. I still remember sitting in that meeting, my hands trembling as I signed the paperwork. It wasn't just a business deal. It was proof that I had made it. From a kid who once begged for a job as a helper, I had become a supplier signing deals with companies that once ignored me. The feeling was indescribable. Within 5 years, my business had grown far beyond what I could have imagined. I had a small team, delivery vans, and clients in multiple cities. I didn't just survive anymore. I thrived. People who once doubted me now came asking for advice. My success became a quiet revenge. Not against anyone in particular, but against every voice that ever told me I couldn't make it. One day, I bought a car, not just any car, but the same model that Rayan, the boy who once mocked me, used to flaunt in school. The moment I sat behind the wheel, I felt something shift inside me. It wasn't pride or arrogance, it was peace. I had finally reached a point where I didn't need to prove anything to anyone. I didn't need to go back and show him what I had achieved. The world had a funny way of letting karma do the talking. Driving that car past my old school, I thought about all the years I'd spent chasing respect, success, and stability. I realized that every setback, every painful moment had been necessary. Without them, I wouldn't have become the person I was. The struggle wasn't punishment, it was preparation. And as I looked at my reflection in the rearview mirror, I saw not the boy who was once laughed at, but the man who turned those laughs into lessons and those tears into triumph. I whispered to myself, "You did it. You really did it." When my secretary said that name, my world seemed to pause for a moment. Rayan Malik. It was like a ghost from a past I had buried long ago had suddenly stepped into my office. I took the file from her hand and saw his picture clipped to the top corner. The same boy who once mocked me in front of everyone, the same person who turned my pain into fire, was now asking me for a job. I leaned back in my chair and stared at his photo for a long time. He looked thinner, older, and broken. The pride that once lived in his eyes was gone, replaced with something else: desperation. I asked my secretary to send him in. My heart was calm on the outside, but deep inside, memories from years ago started flashing like scenes from a movie. The dusty schoolyard, the laughter, the humiliation, the way my face burned when he called me the charity kid. I could still hear the echo of those laughs even now, though they didn't hurt anymore. They just reminded me how far I had come. The door opened slowly, and there he was. For a moment he froze when our eyes met. He recognized me instantly, and I could see the shock ripple across his face. His hands trembled slightly as he held his resume. The confident, arrogant Rayan Malik from school was gone. What stood before me was a man stripped of all pride. Life had done what I never could. It humbled him. He forced a weak smile. "Hey, I didn't know this was your company." I didn't smile back. "Please sit." He nodded and sat down, his posture nervous. The silence in the room was heavy. He tried to avoid my eyes, pretending to adjust his tie or fix his papers, but I could see how uneasy he was. I picked up the file and flipped through it slowly. His work history was all over the place. Short-term jobs, gaps in employment, unfinished projects. The man who once acted like the world belonged to him now looked like someone struggling to stay afloat. "So, you're looking for a position here?" I said. "Yes," he replied quietly. "I've been trying to get back on my feet. My father's company, it went under. Things have been difficult. His voice cracked slightly and he lowered his eyes. I just need a chance. I nodded, not saying anything. I wanted to see how much truth was in his words. His tone wasn't the same as before. There was no arrogance, no fake confidence, just exhaustion and shame. I studied him for a few seconds before speaking again. Do you remember school? I asked. He hesitated. Yes, he whispered. Do you remember what you said to me that day? He closed his eyes, the memory hitting him like a slap. I do, he said softly. And I've regretted it for years. You called me the charity kid. You laughed when everyone joined in. My words weren't angry. They were calm, almost emotionless. Do you know what that moment did to me, Rayan? He looked up slowly. I'm sorry, he said. I really am. I was young, stupid, and entitled. Life taught me my lesson. You didn't deserve that. I didn't respond right away. I let the silence do its work. He fidgeted, waiting for my judgment, like a man standing before a judge who already knew his crime. Finally, I leaned forward and said, You're right. You were stupid, but at least you know that now. He nodded, his eyes downcast. I took a deep breath and closed the file. This company isn't built on sympathy. It's built on hard work, discipline, and persistence. Things you never valued back then. If I hire you, it won't be because of who you used to be, but because you're ready to rebuild from zero. Are you? His eyes met mine again. For a second, I saw that spark. Not arrogance, but hope. Yes, he said firmly. I'm ready. I'll do anything. I leaned back in my chair and studied him for a few more seconds. Then I said, You can start next week. You'll be in the warehouse division. Entry level. No special treatment. You'll earn your place here like everyone else. His lips parted slightly, as if he couldn't believe what he'd just heard. You're giving me the job. I'm giving you a chance, I corrected him. Don't waste it. For a moment he didn't speak. Then he stood up slowly. Thank you, he said, his voice trembling. You have no idea what this means to me. I do, I said quietly. Because once upon a time I needed someone to give me a chance too, but no one did. I built my own. He nodded and walked toward the door. Before leaving, he turned and looked at me one last time. His eyes were filled with gratitude and guilt, two emotions that rarely share the same space. Then he left, and the door closed behind him. When the silence returned, I sat back and stared at the city through the window. The same city that once ignored me now carried my name on contracts, offices, and business cards. The same streets where I once walked with empty pockets now had people working for me. Life had completed a full circle. But the strangest part was, I didn't feel the satisfaction I expected. There was no thrill of revenge, no moment of triumph. What I felt instead was peace. The calm that comes when you realize you don't need to humiliate someone to win. I didn't need to make him suffer. His life had already done that. As I turned off the lights in my office that night, I looked at his file once more. The name that once haunted me no longer had power over me. I smiled faintly and whispered to myself, You see, Rayan, the world always finds a way to balance things. You laughed when I had nothing, and now you stand where I once stood, waiting for someone to believe in you. And with that, I placed the file in the new employees folder, locked the drawer and walked out. The air outside felt lighter than ever before. I realized then that true victory isn't about watching others fall. It's about rising so high that you no longer care who once tried to keep you down. When Rayan stepped into my office, it took me a moment to realize who he was. Time had changed him in ways that words could barely describe. The confidence that once radiated from him was gone, replaced by a quiet unease that clung to every movement he made. His clothes were plain, the kind of suit you wear when you're trying to look professional but can't afford to. His eyes looked hollow, drained of the arrogance I once despised. He looked older, smaller somehow, as if life had been slowly chipping away at him piece by piece. I stood up and greeted him with a polite smile, extending my hand. Mr. Rayan Malik, I said evenly, please, have a seat. He nodded, shook my hand lightly, and sat down across from me. He didn't recognize me, not yet. To him, I was just another employer, another chance at stability. To me, he was a memory I thought I had outgrown, but apparently, fate had decided to bring back. He cleared his throat, adjusted his tie, and began speaking. Thank you for seeing me, sir. I've worked in the sales and operations sector for over 7 years. My experience includes client management, logistics, and product distribution. His voice tried to sound confident, but there was a tremor underneath it, a crack that revealed how fragile his confidence really was. I didn't interrupt him. I just watched. Every word he spoke reminded me of the boy he once was. Loud, smug, full of pride. The boy who made fun of me for wearing torn shoes and carrying a second-hand bag. But the man sitting in front of me now was nothing like that boy. He was tired, cautious, almost apologetic in the way he moved and spoke. I could see the years of struggle written across his face. It was strange, really. I had dreamed about this moment, imagined how it would feel to see him brought down by life, to have the tables turned completely. But now that it was happening, all I felt was calm. He kept talking about his past jobs, trying to sound like a professional who had things under control. But his eyes told a different story. A story of setbacks, of doors slammed shut, of pride swallowed again and again just to survive another day. At one point, his voice trailed off, and he looked at me with a faint smile. "I know my experience isn't as strong as others," he said quietly, "but I believe I can prove myself if given a chance." Those words hit harder than I expected. I remembered saying something similar years ago when I was applying for my first job. I remembered the way people looked at me, like I wasn't enough. I had been that desperate man once. Halfway through the interview, I leaned forward and said, "Rayan." He stopped speaking. "Yes, sir?" I looked straight at him and asked, "Do you remember mocking a poor kid in school for wearing torn shoes?" For a second, everything in the room went silent. His eyes widened and his face went pale. He blinked a few times, trying to process what he'd just heard. Then his lips parted slightly, and his voice came out in a shaky whisper. You're that guy?" I nodded slowly, a faint smile on my face. "Yes, the charity kid." The silence that followed was heavier than any words could carry. I could see the memory hit him like a wave. That schoolyard, the laughter, the shame he had caused. He looked down, his fingers trembling slightly. I'm sorry," he said quietly. "I was young and stupid. I didn't think about how much it hurt." I nodded again. "We all were," I said, "but some of us learned from it." He looked up, his eyes searching my face for anger or resentment, but there was none. I had carried that moment for years, but now it felt distant, like a story from another lifetime. I reached into the drawer, pulled out a folder, and placed it in front of him. "Congratulations, Rayan," I said evenly. "You're hired." He stared at me in disbelief. "You're hiring me?" "Yes," I said, leaning back in my chair. "Because I don't need revenge. I just need you to see who I became, without hating you back." He sat frozen for a few seconds, then let out a breath he had probably been holding since the moment he walked in. His eyes softened, and for a brief second, I saw something I never thought I'd see from him. Gratitude. "Thank you," he said quietly. "You don't know what this means to me." "I do," I said simply, "because once upon a time, I needed someone to give me a chance too, but no one did, so I built my own." He nodded slowly, and I could tell that he didn't know what to say. The power dynamic between us had shifted completely, but I wasn't there to humiliate him. Life had already done that. He looked around my office, the awards on the wall, the view of the city, the quiet hum of success, and I could see in his eyes that he understood exactly how far apart our worlds had drifted. He stood up, still holding the contract in his hand. "I'll work hard," he said softly. "I won't let you down." "I know," I replied. "Just make sure you never forget what brought you here." He gave a small nod and turned to leave. At the door he paused, then looked back at me. "I really am sorry," he said again, "and I'm proud of what you've become." For the first time, I smiled genuinely. "Take care, Rayan," I said. When the door closed behind him, I sat there in silence for a long time. I thought I would feel triumphant, that his regret would bring me satisfaction, but it didn't. What I felt instead was a strange, quiet peace. I had spent years chasing success, driven by the need to prove him wrong. But now, seeing him like that, I realized that real victory wasn't in proving anything. It was in letting go. I looked at his signed contract and then out the window. The same city that had once ignored me now stretched beneath my feet. I had built everything from nothing, not out of hate, but out of hunger. The hunger to never feel powerless again. And now, even with him sitting across from me, defeated and desperate, I didn't feel hate. I just felt free. The laughter that once haunted me had lost its echo. The pain that had once fueled me had turned into something stronger, understanding. And as I turned off the lights and left the office that evening, I whispered to myself, "You see, Rayan, the real revenge was never about making you suffer. It was about becoming someone you'd have to respect." Rayan worked under me for 6 months, and in all that time, I watched him closely. Not out of suspicion, but out of quiet curiosity. The man who once mocked me in the schoolyard now moved carefully, respectfully, as if every step he took had been measured against a past he could never forget. He arrived early, stayed late, and performed every task I assigned with a diligence that surprised some of my other employees. He didn't complain when the work was difficult, and he didn't ask for favors when things were complicated. He seemed to understand, perhaps more than anyone else, that opportunities are not handed out. They are earned. Over those months, I saw him change. The arrogance that had once defined him, the smirk that could cut through someone's pride, had vanished. In its place was humility, not forced or fake, but the kind that grows when a person has faced the consequences of their actions and learned from them. He listened attentively during meetings, took notes diligently, and even sought advice from junior staff, acknowledging their experience without hesitation. It was strange to witness, almost poetic, how life had reshaped him into someone I could respect. Sometimes, when he didn't realize I was observing, I would catch him staring out the window or at his hands, as if thinking about the past. Perhaps he thought about the boy he used to be, the mistakes he made, and the arrogance that once defined him. I didn't speak to him about those days. I let him come to his own understanding. What had happened between us in the schoolyard no longer mattered. It had already served its purpose. One afternoon, he came into my office. There was a slight hesitation in his step, a nervousness I hadn't seen in him before. He didn't carry a folder, didn't have papers to present. He simply wanted to speak. I gestured for him to sit, and he did, hands clasped in front of him, eyes downcast. I wanted to say something, he began, voice quiet but steady. I've been thinking about the way things were. A long time ago, he paused, swallowing hard. I know that I hurt you. I know that I embarrassed you. And I want to acknowledge that. I want to tell you that I'm sorry. I didn't respond immediately. I let him speak. Sometimes people need to articulate their regrets for themselves, not for others. It's a step toward understanding, toward growth. He continued, I've spent years trying to figure out why I acted the way I did, why I thought it was funny to belittle someone else. I realize now how foolish I was, how cruel. I've paid for it in ways I never expected. And seeing the way you've built your life, it's humbling. I nodded slowly, letting the words settle between us. There was no need to remind him of the past, no need to lecture him or make him feel small. He was already processing it, already learning from it. Then he said something that caught me completely off guard. You could have destroyed me. You could have humiliated me the way I humiliated you. But instead, you gave me a chance. You trusted me. You let me prove myself. I'll never forget that. I felt a quiet smile spread across my face. It wasn't pride or arrogance. It was understanding. That, right there, was the lesson I had been waiting for him to learn. That's the difference between us, Rayan, I said softly. You laughed at my pain. I learned from it. I didn't need revenge. I needed growth. And grace. He nodded, blinking back a mixture of relief and awe. I could see it in his posture, the way he straightened his shoulders, as if shedding some invisible weight. I understand, he whispered. And I want to be like that too. I want to learn, to grow, to earn respect the right way. We didn't need to say more. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full of meaning. It was the kind of quiet that comes after an important conversation, after a truth has been understood. He left my office that day, not just as an employee, but as a man who had glimpsed the power of humility and the impact of mercy. In the weeks that followed, I noticed subtle changes in him. He began to take initiative, suggesting improvements to processes, mentoring newer employees, and showing a genuine interest in helping the company grow. He never boasted about his past, never tried to reclaim any misplaced pride. Instead, he focused on the work at hand, proving every day that he had internalized the lesson I had given him without even needing to teach it. Watching him, I reflected on my own journey. I realized that the true measure of success isn't wealth or status. It's how you treat others when you have the power to do otherwise. It's how you respond to those who have wronged you. It's having the strength to rise above bitterness, to turn pain into purpose, and to extend grace even when it isn't expected. Rayan's transformation reminded me that life's most profound lessons often come through the way we treat others. My victory over the past wasn't in wealth or status, but in the ability to extend kindness to someone who once caused me pain. By choosing grace over revenge, I had not only freed myself from anger, but had given him an opportunity to become a better person. One evening, As I left the office, I noticed him still working at his desk, focused, diligent, and calm. There was no trace of arrogance, no shadow of the boy who once mocked me. Instead, there was a quiet confidence, earned through effort and tempered by humility. I smiled to myself, realizing that true strength lies in mercy, in patience, and in the courage to rise above past hurts. And in that moment, I understood something deeper than I had ever known, that the real power in life isn't in defeating others or proving yourself superior. It's in showing grace when it's least expected, in lifting someone up when they deserve to fall, and in teaching through example rather than through force. That is the kind of legacy that lasts, the kind that changes lives, and the kind that echoes far beyond the walls of any office or schoolyard. As I walked out into the quiet night, leaving the lights of the office behind, I felt lighter than ever before. Years of struggle, humiliation, and ambition had led to this. Not just for me, but for someone else too. And for the first time, I knew that every hardship, every tear, and every challenge had a purpose. It wasn't just about building a business or rising above humiliation. It was about learning, teaching, and living with the strength of grace. I sat alone in my office that evening. The city sprawled beneath me, each light twinkling like a reminder of how far I had come. The memories of my past, the dusty schoolyard, the laughter, the pointed fingers, the humiliation, came rushing back, but this time they felt distant, almost irrelevant. Those moments that once stung so sharply had become the very fuel that carried me forward. I could still hear Rayan's mocking voice echoing in my head, but instead of anger or shame, it now stirred something different: motivation, clarity, and resolve. I had promised myself that one day the world would recognize my worth. That day had arrived, and yet it wasn't delivered in the way I had imagined as a teenager. It had come through persistence, effort, and a refusal to let pain dictate the course of my life. I remembered walking into my first small job after countless rejections, my hands raw from working in the mechanic shop, my mind full of dreams bigger than my reality. Every rejection letter, every door closed in my face, every sleepless night, spent wondering if I would ever escape poverty, had led me here. I had endured hunger, exhaustion, and doubt. Yet each struggle had strengthened me in ways I could only understand now. Success wasn't simply a reward. It was the proof that perseverance pays off. The answer to every taunt, every laugh, every sneer that had once threatened to define me. And then there was Rayan, standing in my office months ago, the boy who once seemed invincible, now humbled, seeking a chance I didn't owe him. I remembered his hesitant voice, his trembling hands, the way he looked at me as if the world had finally corrected its balance. He expected scorn or punishment, but instead I offered opportunity and fairness. I didn't need revenge. Life had already humbled him. My victory was never about seeing him suffer. It was about showing that success is far more powerful than bitterness. The contrast between us wasn't just marked by wealth or status. It was marked by resilience, by the ability to transform pain into progress, by the choice to rise instead of retaliate. I thought about the countless hours I had spent building my company from nothing, the small victories that had once seemed insignificant, a client signed, a contract secured, a team member motivated, were all threads in a larger tapestry, weaving together a life I could finally call mine. I recalled the moment I bought the same model of car Rayan had once flaunted in school. It wasn't about showing him up. It was a symbol, a marker of how far I had come on my own terms. Each milestone, each achievement, carried within it the quiet satisfaction of proving to myself that I had always been capable, even when others doubted me. Success, I realized, is the sweetest form of revenge because it doesn't require malice. It doesn't need to tear anyone down to lift yourself up. The satisfaction doesn't come from watching others stumble. It comes from the deep, unwavering knowledge that you have grown stronger than the circumstances that once threatened to break you. It comes from knowing that you have preserved your integrity, that you have refused to be consumed by anger, and that you have chosen to rise above every insult, every humiliation, and every obstacle. I remembered the way Rayan had worked under me for months, how he carried himself with humility, how he embraced the opportunity I had given him. There was something almost poetic in seeing someone once arrogant learn what it meant to respect effort and value trust. Life has a way of teaching lessons, and sometimes those lessons arrive not through punishment, but through circumstance. He learned the hard way, as I had, that arrogance and cruelty can only carry you so far. That day, as he walked out of my office, head bowed slightly, I felt no triumph in the sense of revenge. Instead, I felt a quiet satisfaction, a recognition that the journey I had taken was validated not by his suffering, but by my growth. I leaned back in my chair and allowed my mind to drift across the years. I thought of my parents, the sacrifices they made, the small acts of love and diligence that allowed me to survive and dream. I thought of nights spent working by dim lights, of lessons learned through hardship, of the relentless determination that pushed me forward even when the world seemed indifferent. Every challenge, every setback, every moment of doubt had a purpose. They had built me into someone capable of facing my past, of offering grace instead of retaliation, and of achieving a success that no one could take away. The city outside seemed to pulse with life, each street, and building a reminder of opportunity, struggle, and triumph. I reflected on the lessons I had learned, that humiliation can ignite strength, that adversity can shape character, that the laughter of others can become the spark for your own journey. Life has a way of balancing itself. Those who mock you today may need your help tomorrow. Those who doubt your worth may one day witness your resilience. And the most powerful truth of all is that success isn't merely measured by wealth, status, or recognition. It's measured by the inner peace, dignity, and grace you carry once the world has tried to weigh you down. I smiled softly, thinking back to that young boy standing in the schoolyard, terrified, humiliated, and unsure of what the future held. If he could see me now, he would see not someone who got even, but someone who had transformed every hardship into a ladder, every insult into fuel, and every setback into strength. I had risen not by destroying others, but by building myself, and in doing so, I had achieved the kind of victory that lasts a lifetime. As I turned off the office lights and glanced one last time at the skyline, I whispered to myself, a quiet promise fulfilled. This is the life I was meant to build. This is the success I earned, and this is the sweetest revenge of all. Not because anyone fell, but because I rose higher than I ever imagined. I've spent years reflecting on what truly matters in life, and the lesson I've learned is clear. Success is never about proving others wrong. It's about proving yourself right. For so long, I carried the weight of humiliation, the sting of ridicule, and the bitterness of being underestimated. I thought for a long time that achieving success would feel sweeter if it served as revenge, if it showed everyone who doubted me just how wrong they were. But over time, I realized that energy spent on resentment is wasted energy. It doesn't create, it doesn't build, and it doesn't last. The only thing that endures is the work you put into yourself, the effort you invest in becoming the person you were meant to be, and the life you create from your own determination and resilience. The people who laughed at me, mocked me, or dismissed me had no power over my growth unless I let them. Their judgment could have crushed me, but it didn't. Every insult, every pointed finger, every moment of shame became fuel for something far greater. I chose to channel that energy into action, into learning, into building, and into growing stronger in every way possible. I studied, I worked long hours, I made sacrifices, and I faced rejection after rejection, knowing that each step brought me closer to the life I wanted to create. And in that process, I discovered the most important truth. Real success is never about revenge. It's about rising above, proving to yourself that you are capable, and building a life that reflects your own strength and perseverance. Hate is easy, but it is empty. It feels powerful in the moment, but it leaves you exhausted, angry, and stuck in the past. Growth is hard, but it is real. It takes patience, resilience, and the courage to keep moving forward, even when the world seems determined to knock you down. It's not instantaneous, and it's rarely glamorous. It doesn't make for dramatic stories in the headlines, but it builds something far more meaningful, a life that cannot be shaken by the doubts or mockery of others. Every late night spent working, every failure turned into a lesson, every small victory accumulated over time. That is the real proof of your worth. That is the success that silences critics without a word. I think back to Rayan, the boy who laughed at me in the schoolyard. At the time, I hated him with every fibre of my being. I wanted him to feel the same humiliation I felt, to understand what it was like to be powerless. But life had a different lesson in store. When he came into my office years later, humbled and seeking opportunity, I had the chance to respond in one of two ways. I could have let old bitterness dictate my actions, or I could offer him grace. I chose the latter. I didn't give him a harsh lesson or public humiliation. I gave him a chance. And in doing so, I realized something profound. The act of rising above, of showing strength through grace rather than revenge, carries more power than any vindictive act could. Every person who has ever doubted you, every person who has laughed at your struggles, every person who has tried to diminish your worth, they do not control your life. You do. And the way you respond to their judgment defines you far more than their actions ever could. When you focus on building your skills, pursuing your goals and improving yourself, you create something that cannot be taken away. You create a life that speaks louder than words. A story that demonstrates your resilience and strength without needing to point fingers or recount old wrongs. The world has a way of coming full circle. Those who mocked you, who underestimated you, who dismissed your potential, they may one day see your success, and when they do, you won't need to speak. Your life will say it all. Every achievement, every milestone, every moment of perseverance will be a testament to your strength. You won't need to prove anything to them directly. The mere fact that you rose, that you built, that you thrived, that will speak louder than any insult ever could. The satisfaction of knowing you have created a life defined by your own effort, your own choices, and your own integrity is far more fulfilling than seeing anyone else brought low. I've learned that patience and persistence are stronger than hatred. Dedication and integrity outshine cruelty. Grace is more powerful than retaliation. By focusing on my own journey, by dedicating myself to growth rather than revenge, I've discovered a kind of freedom that no insult or past humiliation could ever take away. I don't carry resentment. I don't carry bitterness. I carry lessons, experience, and the knowledge that my life is defined by what I've built, not by what others try to take from me. And that is the moral I live by now. Rise, don't retaliate. Invest your energy into yourself, not into punishing others. Focus on building the life they said you could never have. Take the lessons from your pain, turn them into fuel, and keep moving forward. Success built on perseverance, integrity, and self-belief is the most satisfying kind because it doesn't just prove something to the world, it proves something to yourself. And when they see it, when they witness the life you've created, the achievements you've earned, and the person you've become, they will understand without a word being spoken. Every step forward is a statement. Every accomplishment is a message. Every act of resilience is proof that you chose to rise instead of retaliate, to grow instead of hate, and to build instead of destroy. That is the kind of success that lasts. That is the kind of victory that is real, meaningful, and unshakable. And it is available to anyone willing to focus on themselves, willing to work, willing to rise above the smallness of others' judgment. So when life challenges you, when humiliation strikes, when people laugh at your struggles or doubt your worth, remember this: you have the power to rise. You have the power to build. You have the power to create a life that speaks louder than any insult ever could. Let your story, your actions, and your achievements become the proof of your strength, your resilience, and your character. That is the truest, deepest form of success, the kind that no one can ever take away, the kind that lasts a lifetime, and the kind that proves, without words, that you were always capable of more than anyone ever imagined.